Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm unboxing the Onexplayer 2. I supported the Indiegogo campaign and I finally have this in my hands. I won't get incredibly detailed with this video just because I'll save that for the final review, but I will talk specs, showcase some gameplay, and talk about anything I've noticed that I'm enjoying or concerned about. I'll keep the unboxing footage rolling here as I cover the specs, starting with the CPU. This has the AMD Ryzen 7 6800U. We've seen this in some other handhelds. I just reviewed the AOK Zoe A1 that had that in there, so very similar spec-wise here with that. That has 8 cores and 16 threads, running at up to 4.7 gigahertz. This has the Radeon 680M iGPU with 12 compute units, and this is the RDNA 2 structure, and it can run at 2200 megahertz. For RAM, this has up to 32 gigs of LPDDR5. I actually have the 16 gig version, and that runs at 6400 megahertz. And this has a full-size M.2 2280 SSD, and it also has the option to use a micro SD card. I have the 512 gigabyte version, but you can get this in a 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte version also. For the screen, this is an IPS panel, and this is running at 2560 by 1600 for the resolution. I think we're going to see a lot more handhelds with this larger resolution this year, and this is an 8.4 inch screen, so it does make a little bit more sense with that higher resolution, but that is quite high. You're basically kind of running this a little bit over 1440p because it is the 16 by 10 aspect ratio, not the 16 by 9 that you would see with a regular monitor. This is a 60 hertz screen, kind of disappointed with that. I do want to see this year, hopefully, one of these handhelds has a 120 hertz screen with it, but for right now we are stuck at 60 hertz. This has Wi-Fi 6, which is blazing fast if you have the Wi-Fi for it, so downloading games is super fast. I like seeing this. And this also has Bluetooth 5.0, so if you're going to connect any wireless earbuds, headsets, controllers, anything like that with this, it will have a good connection. For the speakers, this has the Harman Kardon tuned stereo speakers, and these things get really loud. They actually sound really good. So out of all the handhelds, I would definitely say that this is the best sounding speakers that I've heard to date. And actually, with that being said, let's go ahead and do a quick sound test for these. So I do have to kind of scale that back in post just so that it is even with the other levels in this video. But yeah, these things get very, very loud, so I like these speakers. And for the battery, we have a 65.5 watt hour battery with a 17,100 milliamp capacity. This is the exact same thing that they have on the AOK Zoe A1. It's something that I mentioned in that review. I'm pretty sure that these are the same parent company for both of these products. Matter of fact, the packaging looks pretty identical with these two products. And that information I actually got with some different reviews that I read online, and it becomes very apparent again when you actually start looking at the packaging and even these specs. This looks pretty identical outside of the screen to the AOK Zoe A1. I mean, even the charging block looks the same, and then the internal software, so where you actually get to change and tweak the different watt output or the fan speeds or anything like that. The color is different, but essentially the layout looks exactly the same. One of the things that this is doing to differentiate it from the AOK Zoe A1 and its other products, or actually any handheld on the market, is the detachable controllers. Of course, that gets it compared to the Nintendo Switch. The hardware is completely different. We're talking about different ecosystems in terms of the games that they have. But they've actually looked at that and they're like, okay, we'll make these controllers detachable. And that was the big draw for me. Now, one of the things that I learned once I got this in my hands is these only work if they're attached to the actual screen or to their dock that you have to buy separately. So these will not work independent, one, of each other, but also of the device unless they're actually connected to this separate piece of hardware that you have to buy for $59. Now that's something I thought I was going to get with doing my order through the Indiegogo campaign, but I just misread that and kind of bummed about that. One, you could only get it for free if you ordered it within the first 2 hours of them launching the campaign. And then outside of that, now I have to order this separate. So it's a separate cost for me or for anybody else that buys this. If you want to actually do that, the one feature that most people I think are going to buy this for, you have to buy a separate piece of hardware in order to get it to actually work. Now, like I said, I went ahead and ordered one, so I will be talking about that in the final review, but still that just was irritating to find out, hey, this only works if you have that piece of hardware. And again, it's a separate cost. And that now brings us to the physical features. And let's start with the controllers, because the first thing I noticed once they were detached is how light they are. So I immediately knew these didn't have any batteries in them, so they wouldn't have any power. The matte look and feel is same as their other handhelds, and I personally really like this, although it does pick up a lot of fingerprints. The buttons here feel good and in fact feel just like the A1 and very similar to the Onexplayer Mini I have. An issue amongst all of those handhelds seems to still persist with this, and that is the triggers feel cheap and flimsy. These are the best among those two other handhelds, but the deck really has the best controls and feel to them. Now, I am happy to report I have only noticed a subtle amount of drift in the controller, similar to what I can find in the deck. Linus showcased this handheld having trouble with drift and dead zones when playing Cyberpunk 2077, and Onexplayer actually made a statement that this had more to do with the game and not their controller, so I was a bit worried. Now, I haven't played Cyberpunk yet, but with all the games I have played, it hasn't been an issue. In Windows though, I have noticed it is harder to control when using it as a mouse, and that's where there seems to be a little bit of drift. Onexplayer says the thumbsticks have a 0.1 millisecond response time and a 1000 Hz polling rate with a deviation of only 0.0003 degrees. Now I'll need more time to test this to confirm performance, but outside of using this as a mouse in Windows, this has been great. They do have a joystick support calibration page in the manual, so you actually get to tweak this using software, so I'll actually try this out for the final review. The D-pad here feels good, and I like it over the 8.1 the A1 has. This has the start and back buttons towards the top, the Windows Xbox key towards the bottom on the left controller, and the mode and LED buttons on the right controller towards the bottom. I haven't figured out how to change the LED lights. Right now you just hold down the LED button and it turns them off and then back on. Hopefully down the road I can figure that out, but as of right now you can't use the software to change this like you can on the AOK Zoe A1. Here it literally can turn it on or off, and that is it. I do like the RGB lights around the joysticks. I think that is a very cool look. Can't figure out how to actually change the color, so hopefully by the time the final review is out, I've figured that out. If not, again, all you can do is turn this on and off, and it is only orange for the color. On the back of the controllers, you'll find the release button, much like the Switch, and the inside has the connection points that you can see. It all looks and feels similar to the Nintendo Switch. I would say the pulling out action is a little bit smoother on the Switch, but overall it still feels really good on the Onexplayer 2. Now, one of the perks that I got with my pre-order on the Indiegogo campaign was the screen protector and some yellow stickers that you can actually put on the device if you'd like for more color. The screen protector feels thin, and I don't know that I'll actually put the stickers on here. I really do like the look of this without anything on it. On the bottom, you'll find the two speakers, a USB 4 for eGPU support as well as charging or connecting accessories to. You can also connect this to an external monitor, which I will be doing for the final review to showcase how it performs with that as well. Now, since the speakers are on the bottom of this, there's something to be mindful of, which is the position that you have the handheld in is going to change how the sound is. For instance, I'll be showcasing footage of me playing games with the Onexplayer 2 sitting upright because it's so thick that it can actually do this, which is great, and this gives me a better angle for recording video, but this also means the speakers are completely covered, so you don't really get any sound. So muffled, you can't really hear anything out of that. Using the kickstand though, this does sound great because it kind of bounces off the bottom of whatever it's sitting on, but just wanted everybody to be mindful of the position here affecting the speakers. Last, you have 5 magnetic connection points like the controllers on the bottom, and this is actually to attach the keyboard if you actually get one. I don't think it has a use outside of that, but I got one and I'll be covering that more in the final review. On the top, you have the power button on the far left. The home button and the keyboard button are next to that, and then you have the turbo button, which will bring up the Onexplayer control menu. In the center, you have a 3.5mm headphone jack, the LED power light, USB Type-C Gen 4 connection just like the bottom, a USB 3.0, which I really like this feature. This is on the A1 as well, and for any peripheral that it may be a keyboard or mouse that only utilizes the USB-A type connection, this is great. That way you're not needing to buy something else. I utilize Bluetooth as well with this, but if I do have something, for instance my keyboards, that just directly need to connect to this, it makes it so easy. So I love this feature. Now next to that you have the micro SD card slot, and then above all of this is the exhaust for the fans. On the back, you'll find the openings for the intake fans as well as the kickstand, which is pretty heavy duty, but it is also very sharp around the edges, so be careful with those because you can actually jam your hand pretty hard when picking this up. For dimensions, this is 12.2 inches wide, 5 inches tall, and 0.9 inches wide. If you take off the controllers, this is 8.19 inches wide, and the other dimensions are the same. This weighs 848 grams, which is roughly 1.87 pounds, so this thing is quite heavy. In fact, one of the things I've noticed with the size and weight is my hands have a tendency to get tired and cramp much sooner than any other handheld I've used. Comparing the size to the Onexplayer Mini, this thing is massive. Looking at it compared to the Steam Deck, it is definitely bigger than that, and then to the A1, it is similar in size. It's probably slightly bigger than the A1 because it does have a slightly bigger screen, but it is pretty comparable. Now inside of the box, if you just purchased the Onexplayer 2, you will have the main body, controllers, charger, and user manual. Now I got perks with ordering mine early, and I paid $8.99 for the Onexplayer and an extra $39 for the keyboard. For the perks, I got the carrying case, skin, screen protector, and joystick caps. The regular cost for my device, which again is the 16 gigs of RAM with 512 gigs of storage, is $12.49. The price goes up from there to $1,500 for either a 32 gigs of RAM with 1 terabyte of storage version or 16 gigs of RAM with 2 terabytes of storage. $8.99 for this, in my opinion, is a decent price point as the performance bests the deck, and it's only a couple $100 more than the highest tier deck, which is $629. $12.50 is enough to buy a decent gaming laptop though, although that won't be quite as portable as this, so that is something to keep in mind. This is pretty much the same cost as the AOK Zoe A1, which that has a similar lineup in terms of RAM and SSD configurations. Now, I don't like telling people what to do with their money, but I do think with this we're going to find the same situation that we had with the A1, which is you have two different camps, right? Hey, this is way too expensive. I'm going to stick with a Steam Deck because it is cheaper and it still has really good performance. And then you're going to have people that, hey, I don't care about the cost. I want the top tier handheld that I can get my hands on. And this is, in my opinion, definitely looking towards that. This is a high-end portable device with great performance that I'll talk about more in a minute. With this though, the thing that makes me a little bit irritated and concerned is with this higher price, really the way you get a good price on this is you have to be the early adopter. You have to support the crowdfunding, the crowdsourcing campaign that the companies do, because $8.99 to me, that's a decent price for this device. $12.50, it's like, ooh, that's a tougher pill to swallow. And so I don't like that this is kind of the thing that we're seeing a lot with these handhelds, which is, again, you have to get this crowdsourcing version of it in order to get a price that seems more realistic to what it should be all the time. With that being said though, let's go ahead and move on and cover the setup and some games. Setup is just like any Windows device, which this is currently running Windows 11. You'll want to update the software when you first get this so you don't run into any performance issues. And then I would download the AMD Adrenalin software to make sure that you are all up to date on your drivers. And the software actually has a ton of other cool features to optimize your games as well. After getting all of that set up, I downloaded the MSI Afterburner, and then I got Steam, and then downloaded a bunch of games. And this is really where this device shines. The performance here is top notch, and this seems to best the A1 across the board by a little bit, not by a massive margin, but it does seem to best it a little bit. This can display a higher resolution than the A1, which tops out at 1920 by 1200. Which again, the Onexplayer 2 can do 2560 by 1600. And with that, I was a little bit concerned that you wouldn't really be able to play any AAA games at that resolution. But to my surprise, there are some AAA titles that handled this quite well if you're willing to have a 40 to 60 FPS range. Starting with the Doom Eternal, this is running at 2560 by 1600 on low settings, and this blew me away it could even run this. Granted, you aren't holding a steady 60 FPS, but considering most consoles were running 30 FPS game averages until this current generation in most games, I don't feel like 40 to 60 FPS on a handheld device for a AAA title is bad at all. I tried to cause as much chaos as I could to push the hardware, and this held 55 to 60 FPS more consistently than I thought it would. This really blew me away, and performance here is going to be such a big selling point, as this may be double the price of the Steam Deck, but it does feel more like you are getting double the performance with this compared to the AOK Zoe A1. This will of course be dependent upon the game. Moving on to a less graphically demanding game I tried, which is Subnautica, and the game still suffers from pop-in, so that actually caused the FPS to dip at 2560 by 1600. It dropped into the mid-30s once, and after that it held closer to 50 to 60 FPS with occasional drops into the 40s. I think part of this may be more due to the game optimization than solely the device, and you can drop the resolution down to 1200p or 1080p to improve this. Next, I tested out Horizon Zero Dawn because this has struggled on every handheld I've tried for the most part. The A1 did okay at 800p, but the Onexplayer 2 topped that. For 1600p, this holds in the 20s for the FPS the whole time and is extremely choppy, so to me it's pretty unplayable, as anytime you get a lot going on, it will tank the FPS to single digits. At 1080p, this holds in the 30s and 40s for the FPS with occasional dips into the 20s. It's playable at this resolution in my opinion, but for the smoothest performance, you'll want 800p. At this resolution, you will get 60 FPS most of the time with occasional dips into the 30s or 40s for a split second. But this actually jumps into the 70s, and it's actually jumped up into the 80s with it hitting 81 at one point. Although this is a 60 Hz screen, so that really doesn't translate to this. So this seems to have greater performance than the AOK Zoe A1, even with having similar internals. And one of the things that I covered with my review of the A1 is the scale of performance across games you can expect in terms of resolution. For example, less graphically demanding games like Dead Cells, you can play at the highest resolution without worrying about drops below 60 FPS. If you're into emulators, that will be another area where you can expect similar performance with less demanding games. For AAA titles, it's all about tweaking your settings to find the sweet spot and taking advantage of resolution scaling like the AMD FSR if a game has it. This can get you 60 FPS averages in AAA titles with low to high settings at higher resolutions like 1080p, 1200p, and 1600p. You really have to spend time tweaking all of these settings to get the most out of these devices. As a grand generalization, since this does have similar although slightly better performance than the A1, 1080p seems to be the easiest go-to with medium settings just to hop in on AAA games and enjoy better performance and visuals than the Steam Deck if you don't want to pour a lot of time into testing settings out. Next, I want to showcase Destiny 2, as this was the main reason I got the A1 and wanted to get the Onexplayer 2. Destiny 2 needs an anti-cheat that you can't get on the Steam Deck without just completely wiping the device and installing Windows on it. For me, the ability to take that game on the go makes the higher price worth it, and the A1 performance has been solid. The Onexplayer 2 though has been even better, and I'm all for it. Now at 1600p, this isn't going to perform that great. This holds in the 30s with occasional peaks into the 40s when there aren't any bad guys around, but once the action picks up, this drops more consistently into the 20s. I wanted to push the hardware a little, so I went to Sorrow Harbor on the moon where there are waves of bad guys, and playing there, this was in the 20 FPS range for most of the time, which isn't ideal, so I dropped this down to 1080p, and with that, it actually was holding low 30s to low 40s for the FPS. Again, I'm trying to create as much action on screen as possible, and to me, this is pretty incredible to get this on a handheld, and this still looks great visually at 1080p, where if you drop this down to 800p, it will look more pixelated. My camera was having a hard time staying focused, so my apologies for that. I did drop this down to 800p just to see what it could do, and this held mid 30s to mid 40s on average, and it was slightly more noticeable in terms of the increase with the FPS over 1080p, but again, it will look more pixelated at this resolution, so I personally prefer 1080p as the sweet spot. So in terms of first impressions on the performance side, this has really made a good one. What Onexplayer has been able to cram into this size is quite incredible. I still have a lot of tests to do, but out of the things I've been able to test so far, I'm really impressed with this thing. The controllers, on the other hand, needing a separate attachment when you're already paying a high premium is something I'm not happy about. It should just come with this as a package deal because that's one of the main selling points with this handheld over other ones. The quality still feels cheap with the triggers on these, and like I said, that is the same that I felt across the board with the other handhelds outside of the Steam Deck. That is the best quality I've felt with the controls on a handheld, but all the other buttons on this feel really good and they do feel quality. I'm going to spend more time testing games to see if there are any drift or dead zones I find, but initially I'm happy to say that this wasn't an issue for me outside of Windows. And last, the larger and heavier size is something that I'm going to see if I can actually adapt to or not, because it's making my hands cramp right now, like I mentioned earlier, with longer play sessions. Well, that's going to be it for this one. I'll have links to the Indiegogo campaign and the Onexplayer website if you want to check this out for yourself. And if you have any questions or things you want me to cover in the final review, let me know in the comment section. If you liked the video, hit the like button for me as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, specifically with the review coming out here hopefully in the next month, hit the subscribe button for me so you get notified when that comes out. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.